Hi everybody, my name is Patrick Harvey, and this is the true and now expanded story of the Stupid Computer BBS that ran in Atlanta, Georgia in area code 404 from the late 80s until about 1998. It was also known as TSC BBS. Now, this is a remake of a video that I originally recorded in 2005 on a very low resolution video camera that had 640 by 480 resolution. And I thought it would be a good time to re-record the video now in 2024, almost 20 years later at a much higher resolution, and then use this opportunity to add some additional information that you might want to hear about. So the story begins in the early 80s. I'd come down to Atlanta, Georgia from Maryland to attend Georgia Tech as an information and computer science major. And the first or second year I was there, I met a classmate who also had a TRS-80. Now those days, the brand of computer that you had was a big deal. The Apple people wouldn't speak to the TRS-80 people, and the Atari people wouldn't talk to the Apple people. It was all in fun. But which computer you bought was an important thing. Now, I had a TRS-80 Model 1 that I had shipped down to school, and it was the first TRS-80 computer that Radio Shack had come out with, and over time I had expanded it and added to it. Now, one day I was invited to a friend's room, and when I got there, I saw his computer, which was a TRS-80 Model 3 or 4. I never did learn which it was. And this was an all-in-one unit, slightly more advanced than what I had because it had built-in disk drives. My machine was still using a tape player to load programs, and seeing disk drives in action was pretty cool. Now, Radio Shack had come out with these newer versions of computers when FCC regulations about radio emissions from devices had become more strict. I noticed the computer was on and the screen was scrolling and it was doing things on its own, which really fascinated me. And as I watched it, I saw people calling in, and I stood there for several minutes watching the screen, really being mesmerized by all the things that callers could do. And then suddenly it all froze up and the computer flashed a message on the screen that said it was doing garbage collection. Now, I had no idea what that was, but in my mind I was thinking, cool. Anyway, this combination of computer and BBS software really left me with a great impression and maybe started some events that would occur in the future. So I didn't hear about BBSs for several years after that, but during this time I was increasing my overall computer knowledge, but I really didn't hear a whole lot more about BBSs during that time. But the idea of them did stick in my mind, and I was constantly waiting to hear or see more about them. So it was years later, in the late 80s, I was working in retail, and one day I heard one of my coworkers named Paul talking to someone on the phone. And I don't know what drew me to pay attention to that particular call versus all the other numerous calls that our store got every day, but I decided to kind of listen in from afar. And it was a good thing that I was listening, because as the call progressed, he suddenly shouted, "Log him out, log him off." And that certainly got my attention. And as I was waiting to hear more, a customer came in and I didn't hear the rest of the conversation. So a bit later, when we were both free for a moment, I asked my friend about the conversation. What was that conversation all about? I found out he ran a BBS called Hangar 15. And I was like, cool. I asked him if I could see the BBS, and he invited me to his house. And when we got there, the lights in the house were a bit dim. And on a table, almost like a shiny diamond, at least to me, I saw a bright, colorful, scrolling screen displaying some amazing, almost shiny graphics of a type that I had never seen before. And I later learned this type of graphics were called ANSI graphics, and they were really amazing. And I watched Paul, who was the sysop, to see how he logged into the system and what he could do and what the person calling in was doing and what the computer was doing. And, you know, in my mind, I was just saying, wow. I was so impressed by the power that a sysop had and what he could do, and I wanted that. Now, Paul was very kind, and he showed me a collection of ANSI art, much of it created by him. And he showed me some online games that were on his BBS that he called doors. And he showed me a separate program called C-Show to view graphics. And he showed me all the stuff that his BBS could do. And I just remember thinking to myself, holy crap. Well, a short time later, I decided it was time for me to create my own BBS. So I built a 386 SX PC and I added a phone line to my apartment. And I don't remember all the specs that my BBS had, but I started off with one hard drive and I think it had about 2 gigs of space on it. And of course, at that time, hard drives were super duper expensive. So that was the best I could do. And I chose the Wildcat BBS software, which was different from what my friend had, but I had researched the various, BBS software packages, and to me, it looked the coolest. So I had to have it. I decided to run an operating system called DR-DOS. Now, most people at that time used MS-DOS 5, but DR-DOS offered me some multitasking capability, and I think at that time it was called time slicing or something like that. But I wanted that so I could use my computer in one window while people browsed my BBS in another window. I also used a program called Superstore to compress my hard drive, and that gave me a bit more storage. Now, I had to use that because hard drives were so expensive at that time and held so little information. Now, later on, I did add another hard drive, and eventually I added 4 additional single-speed 1,000 millisecond CD-ROM drives that Radio Shack had come out with. And a bit later, I added a 5 CD SCSI changer that I bought at a computer show. I used every interrupt the machine had, every DMA channel, and every single drop of memory to make that thing work. Because at that time, there was no such thing as plug and play. So tweaking things to that degree to make things work was quite a skill and quite a fun thing to learn. By adding various shareware CDs to my BBS, I was quickly able to offer thousands and thousands of files that people could download. When I first started the BBS, I had a 1200 baud modem, which seems so horrible right now, but that was a big thing at that time, and I ran it that way for a couple of years. And later, I upgraded to 2400 baud, and then later to 14.4. As I mentioned, over the years, the BBS grew, first with an additional hard drive, then with the additional 4 CD-ROMs. And, in addition to running out of DMA channels and interrupts, I had Y cables on the power supply. I had duct tape holding things together. But it was so cool watching the PC start up each day, watching the lights flashing on the CD-ROM drives, hearing the whirring sounds that they made and the almost musical sounds that the hard drives made. And I really enjoyed watching users as they perused the site. Now, during this time, there were probably 3 main types of BBSs. There were really big multi-line BBSs, smaller BBSs like I had, and so-called underground or elite boards. After getting to know some of the users of the underground BBSs, I was able to get access to some of them, and it was there where I learned more about viruses and something else called ANSI bombs. Now, in those days, to see all the colorful graphics on a BBS, a user had to run something called ANSI.sys from their config.sys file, and they'd have to add a line to their config.sys saying device equals ANSI.sys. And this would allow people to see all the wonderful graphical screens that use these ANSI codes that would decode when they would log in or do something on the BBS. One day I was on someone else's BBS and suddenly I was logged off, and I wasn't sure why, but a message appeared on the screen telling me to buzz off. And I had no idea why. But then what amazed me was that any screen that I pressed on my computer after that would display "go away" on my screen. And I was a bit freaked out by that, but also amazed. I learned that he had used some code in his forced log off screen to redefine what happens when I press my keys. And that was really exciting to see something like that. So of course I went away to learn more about this and discovered what could happen to a person using ANSI.sys. And if a person wasn't so nice, there were some pretty nasty things that they could do to you. Now back then, if you wanted to quickly view a text file, you would just type space file name. Now if a malicious person wanted to, they could redefine a single key or multiple keys on your keyboard to type a format command or maybe display something nasty to you, and all this could be activated by you when you were simply viewing a file with ANSI codes in it. Of course, you would have no idea it had ANSI codes in it. So a person with bad intentions could really damage you by redefining one or more of your keys to type a harmful command when you pressed a key. So I decided to use my new knowledge for good. And I wrote an article about ANSI bombs in 2600 magazine, and it appeared in the summer 1993 issue. I also wrote probably the first and only ANSI bomb detector called ANSI Check, ANSICHEK. There were, I think, 9 versions of it, and it was quite primitive, but it would check files for ANSI codes and then see if they contained harmful commands or curse words within that code. I probably was the only BBS that had both a virus and ANSI bomb detector scanner when people uploaded files. At one point, the French government called me and asked for information about ANSI bombs. I have no idea how they knew to contact me, but it was pretty cool, and I ended up faxing them everything that I knew and then never heard anything else back from them again. So things went well for several years. The BBS grew and grew, and in 1995, my BBS was attacked. I never did learn who was responsible, but here's what happened. So as I mentioned, in 1995, the BBS started receiving attacks, and people would upload viruses, sometimes curse at me in chat, and sometimes just be plain mean. Now, my BBS had become more popular as it now appeared in all of the local BBS directories. Now, while only a few users did these attacks or did these mean things, they certainly ruined the overall experience of being a sysop. I ended up purchasing a caller ID so that I have the ability to block calls from certain callers. Now, at that time, a 40 memory caller ID was about the best that I could get. So in early 1995, I arrived home one night from work and immediately took a look at the BBS screen to see how many callers had called in that day. Instead of seeing the familiar Wildcat screen that would show me that information, DR-DOS was displaying an environment error. I was used to all the occasional weird errors every once in a while, so I rebooted the machine and I figured everything would be okay. But this time, the CD-ROM lights did not flash in a sequence I was used to seeing during the boot up process. And I was concerned that perhaps I had picked up a virus. Now at that time, viruses were a bit of a newer thing, and the antivirus programs did not work as well as they do now. I was worried about my system because I had used Superstore to compress my main drive. And when you use Superstore or a similar program like it, like Stacker, there was usually one small area on the drive that was uncompressed and one much larger area that was compressed. So I did a virus scan and I found about 35 infected files on the non-compressed area. I was like, what in the heck is this? I had been hit by the Screaming Fist virus, and just as I thought I had finished cleaning things up or fixing things, my PC beeped around midnight and its CMOS just erased itself. In those days, you had to enter the number of heads and the number of cylinders of each hard drive into the CMOS, and I lost all of that information. I had to disassemble my already very jury-rigged computer to take out the hard drives so I could view the head and cylinder information printed on the drive so I could put that information back into the CMOS. I basically had to work until about 4 a.m. to fix the computer and the compressed drives. And by the end of it, I was like, oh my God. Now, while this situation royally pissed me off, I was also amazed that they had been able to do this. How did they get past my virus scan that I had set up to check all uploaded files? I had to figure out how they did it. I knew that at the time my machine went down, it had logged the time. So I checked my fancy 40 memory caller ID box to see what phone number they had called from. But since the BBS had gone down, people had tried calling it over and over and over, and the number that I needed had fallen out of the caller ID's memory. So I did some more checking, and I found out that someone had uploaded an infected DOS5 command.com file. They had also uploaded a file called pknzip.bat. Now, when my BBS ran a pknzip command to unzip all uploaded files so it could check for viruses, if any files were indeed zipped up to begin with, the pknzip bat file was run instead of the pknzip.exe file that I assumed would be run, because batch files always get run before exe files when a machine searches the DOS path. Whoever had done this knew how Wildcat BBSs suggested that files should be unzipped within the BBS. While my BBS ran a script that would run pknzip in the path of the computer, by them uploading a pknzip.bat, the bat file was run rather than the executable that I and the BBS thought would be run. So that was a big lesson to learn. Always specify the full path of the file you want to run versus having that file just be in your DOS path someplace. A path is a list of places that the computer would check when you would type a file name to run it. Now later on, I warned a few friends who ran Wildcat BBSs to change their scanning batch files so that they'd have a full path specified to their pknzip.exe. I told a BBS friend about how I had been attacked and what had happened, but he didn't believe me and he thought I was making things up. Okay. He asked for a demo of all of this, and so I demonstrated the whole procedure to my friend and showed him how anyone could quickly bring down a Wildcat BBS using pknzip.bat file and an infected command.com file. So it was definitely worth making that change in the scanning of your BBS. After seeing the demo, he was certainly convinced that it now worked. Now, of course, you can imagine how pissed off I was when all of this went down, but I also appreciated the sneakiness and the genius behind the attack, and in a weird way, I admired what the person had done, but I still hated him. I decided to write another article for 2600. It was called Day of the Hacker, and it appeared in the summer 1995 issue. Anyway, things went great for a while, and I constantly upgraded the BBS as money and time permitted. But by the late 1990s, we knew that some big changes were in the wind. Call volumes suddenly dropped, and we suddenly started hearing about the internet. And then in 1998, Wildcat notified its users that it was selling its BBS business. And I was a bit devastated by this, and I think some others were as well. At that time, many of us thought that BBSs would begin providing access points to the newly popular internet. But soon after, the writing was on the wall that BBSs were probably doomed, and the Stupid Computer BBS was finally dismantled. It was a very sad day. I have to tell you that during this period of time when I ran a BBS, it was one of the happiest times of my life because the experience was just so exciting. It was a new technology. You were able to design a system from scratch, front to back. You could play games with users. You could send messages. You could learn new things. You could view photos. You could download cool utilities and files. And it was just really an exciting, cool ride. Now, by running a BBS, I learned so much about computers, both hardware and software. And I learned about myself and about others. I really valued those days. And while I now run several websites, they never fully gave me the same satisfaction that I had when running a BBS. Now, there are some BBSs that still exist, and if you never experienced one, maybe try one. BBSs are almost a forgotten part of computer history, but they should never be forgotten. They're an important part of our computer history, and of course, running one was so fun, and you got to learn so many things. I want to thank you for watching, and I appreciate you watching this video. Have a great day.